What we'll do now is actually make a common condition that you'll see on most generated elevations with a brick gable, and that is a soldier course right underneath the frieze trim, perpendicular to with the joints perpendicular to the slope of the roof, mitered here at the top, 8 inches wide, maybe a little bit over an inch or under an inch thick to give that nice relief. And that's just a common look, and also when it hits a vertical transition to actually terminate it there. And that's a common trim piece that you'll see in a generated elevation. And so what we'll do is I have the same thing here. If I want to actually look at the result, it's been modeled out. If I take a look at it in render, we're not doing this with line work. We're actually wanting to model this, so the view looks good. Modeled trim piece oriented with the slope of the roof, that those borders down there mitered at the top and terminating here at the end. So that's that model, and this is the same model without that soldier course. And with that soldier course, we're actually going to use the trim object. And so it's not an automatic trim, there's not a special button for it, it's going to be the manual trim. So we'll go to the accessories and we'll run the trim command. And in the command line we can add, draw, miter, and all sorts of things there. And then when we do the add, we can add to all sorts of things: polyline, window, door, opening. And this time, since we have this frieze trim already there, we're going to anchor another piece of trim to our frieze trim. So I'll select T for trim, and we'll keep all the defaults, and we can change that after the fact we want. So I'll select enter there, and then we select the frieze board to anchor this trim. We select one trim, added another piece of trim. We'll select this other frieze board and add that trim. So if we take a look at that in an isometric view, and we'll shade this, see what's actually, I'll take it back to the wireframe. It's made these pieces of trim here in our roof. Those pieces of trim are right underneath our frieze. And the default that it used to make this was the last trim that we used, and it happened to be the windowsill. The windowsill has these joints anchored per the object, not globally, so they don't go straight up and down. They're angled per that object, and the object tilted, so the joints are tilted. And the other default width and height isn't quite what we want. We don't want this to be 4 inches tall like a rollock. We want it to be like a soldier, so that'll be 8 inches thick, 8 inches deep. And instead of it being the height of 7 inches like you'd have in a windowsill, we want that to be 1 inch, or maybe a little less in this case. I'll say 3/4 of an inch. So now we have a nice flat soldier course right underneath our frieze. But if we take a look at just the pieces of trim, you see that they overlap, and we want to actually miter those pieces of trim. So to miter them, we select one of the pieces of trim, right mouse click, and select the miter add. Select the miter add. We want to use a bisecting miter, so we select one piece of trim, enter. Then we select the other piece of trim, enter, and it'll miter along where those two intersect. So we have our nice perpendicular joints, 8 inches by 3/4 of an inch, mitered down the bottom. Now, what we can also do, and you'll see that when I have this trim, it actually doesn't quite get to the vertical frieze. I'll make it conceptual so we can see that a little bit better. This piece of trim isn't actually straight cut at that frieze board. If we're doing construction documents and we just want that to generate nicely, all we need to do is stretch that trim piece so that it goes beyond the frieze board, and so we don't actually see it, but not too long. If we make it too long, we'll actually see it beyond where we actually want to see it. So it gets beyond that frieze board. So that's a little too long, so we can actually drag that back. So depending on what you're doing, you can just drag that to the appropriate size to mask it behind that Frieze board, or I'll go into a front view and do it a little bit different method. I have that Frieze board. I can drag this. If I drag it long, it's long enough. But if I don't want that little remainder there, I can actually use the trim cut tool. So if I select the trim, I can use this trim cut. And I'll type in END to get a straight line there and cut that piece of trim. So now that trim is absolutely cut right at that Frieze board. So depending on what you want to do, you can do that. And so I can go to my top view, go to my wireframe, and now when I generate an elevation, and I'll select these objects here, pick a point, okay, and now I have a piece of trim right underneath the Frieze board, and it's terminated at that Frieze.